Hello. Today we're going to be going over patient assessment, which covers chapters 11, 12, and 13, but not in the chronological order. There's 5 parts to the entire 3 chapters. What I would prefer you to do with this particular module is to listen to the lecture first, look at the slides, then go to your book and read, and then revert back to your slides as you're reading through, because you're going to have to bounce back and forth. The reason I do it this way is I believe it builds on the order that we do our patient assessments. Patient assessment is very important. As an EMT, you must master the patient assessment process. And the better you get at it, the easier the job becomes. And patient assessment is used in every patient encounter that you're going to have. And we have 5 main parts of patient assessment. We have our scene size up, we have our primary assessment, history taking, secondary assessment, and reassessment. And it's always in this order. So first and foremost, we're going to take our standard precautions. We need to anticipate any personal protective equipment, PPE, also known as body substance isolation, also known as standard precautions, on every patient that we encounter. And especially now with COVID going on, it's all that much more important, because you don't know if somebody is actually telling you the honest truth when you're interviewing them. So if you would just take your standard precautions with every patient, you have a lot less to worry about. Always have your PPE equipment available and use it appropriately. Use the appropriate equipment to prevent exposure. And before you say or do anything, you pull up on the scene, think of body substance isolation, and is the scene safe? So part of our PPE is gloves, a mask and eye protection, and a PPE gown. The minimum PPE that we're going to wear on every patient contact. With COVID right now, you're going to wear your gloves, you're going to wear eye protection, you're going to wear a mask, you're going to wear a gown. That's not by choice. That is to keep yourself safe. But the minimum protection that we will use is gloves and eye protection on all calls. And we're not talking, PP with COVID. Yes, we're going to go all out. But you should immediately have available eye protection, mask, and a gown if need be. Minimum is eye protection and gloves, but you should have immediately available eye protection, mask, and gown. So the first thing we have is our scene size up. We need to determine if the scene is safe. The scene size up is a very dynamic process and continues throughout the entire call. Just by looking at this picture here, think of all the situations that could happen. You still have other passing vehicles going by. I don't know how many of you ever been on the side of the freeway or in the middle lanes of a freeway and have cars going by you at 75 miles an hour. It's not a good feeling, because when we have to block off lanes on a highway or on a surface street, we're inconveniencing all those other drivers. We didn't create the problem. We're there to fix the problem. So do your scene size up, and remember that this is a dynamic process. It's constantly changing during the course of the call. So we're continuously processing the scene size up throughout the entire call. So with the scene size up, your scene size up is the first part of your patient assessment, and it will begin as you approach the scene. But actually, it really begins when you're dispatched to the call. You're given information about your call when you're dispatched. However, the information that you're given is being relayed to the emergency medical dispatcher by a layperson, not necessarily always dependable information. So you need to think about any threats to your own safety, to the safety of your patients, to bystanders, and you need to determine the nature of the call and to decide if you will need any additional help. This is all part of that scene size up that starts as you're getting dispatched, getting in the ambulance, and going down the road. So our scene size up steps, there's 4 things that you're assessing as you perform your scene size up. Scene safety. Is the scene safety? Is that scene safe for your personal safety, for your partner's safety, for the patient's safety? Oh, yeah. And you got to make sure it's safe for the bystander's safety. So, to ensure that the scene is safe, we got to make sure it's safe for ourselves in this order. It's always in this order: for yourself, your partner, the patient, and bystanders. Then you need to determine the nature of the illness in the medical patient or the mechanism of injury in the trauma patient. We call this mechanism of injury, of course, but we abbreviate it MOI for mechanism of injury, which would be with a trauma patient, or the nature of illness, NOI, which is a medical patient. We need to figure out how many patients we have. Is there one car involved with 3 people in it, and there's only you and your partner? That's going to create the need of another ambulance. Do you need additional resources? Is it going to have to be a rescue situation of which you don't have the proper tools nor the proper training? So now you need to get a rescue response coming. You show up on the scene, and now there's a fire. Now you have to have the fire department come. What about, do you need the police there to direct traffic? Or are the people that are involved fighting? It's not your job to get in the middle of them and break them up. So you may need additional resources. And the assessment and reassessment of scene size up elements continue throughout the call. And it only ends when the call is completely over. And your observations are going to tell you whether you can handle this call with just you and your partner, or if you're going to need additional assistance. As you near the scene, look and listen for other approaching emergency vehicles. Think about darkened areas. Normally, this road is lit up very well, but none of the street lights are on. Could there be down power lines? Last thing you want to do is get out of the ambulance and step on a live wire, nor do you want to drive over a live wire or park on top of a live wire with the ambulance. Look at traffic. Is it backing up? Meaning, is it not moving? Is it moving very, very slow? Do you see any smoke in the direction of the incident? Smoke normally means there's a fire. So maybe it's time, as you're driving up and you see smoke, to maybe contact the fire department. So now that you're on scene, you've checked out, you never want to enter an unsafe scene. You need to make the scene safe or call for someone who can. Remember, your job is to protect yourself, your partner, the patient, and the bystanders. Prevent them from becoming patients, especially if little Johnny and Mary are in the car together. They left out of school at lunchtime on a closed campus and now they got in a wreck. Well, they're going to be on their phone calling mommy and daddy, and I can promise you that mommy and daddy are going to come screaming up there 90 to nothing, jump out of their cars because little Mary or little Johnny are crying, going, mommy, daddy, I've been in a wreck. And mom and dad don't know what's going on other than little Johnny, little Mary are crying. So they very well must be really hurt. So they pull up on the scene, they jump out of their cars and run across 3 lanes of traffic. Well, the other people that are trying to get to work or get to wherever they're needing to go, and they're not watching out for little Johnny and Mary's mom and dad bolting across the road. So you got to stop them. You may have to yell, scream, to keep them from running across 3 lanes of traffic because the other people aren't watching. As you exit your ambulance, smell for odors. Think about gasoline, antifreeze smells, gasoline smells, diesel smells. What about natural gas? When you can see it, look for clues that may indicate a hazardous material's been spilled. Here's a can with an oxidizer label on it. That's a pretty good indication that there's some sort of hazardous material. How about at a MVC, a motor vehicle collision, or a rescue scene? As you're attempting to determine if the scene is safe to enter, look for possible threats to your safety, the safety of your team, and bystanders. Down power lines on a vehicle with a person inside, and you got Ricky Rescue grabbing the car door. Oh, he's safe. He's got his rubber soled tennis shoes on. You're going to have to get him away. If you're not trained to deal with downed electrical lines, you need to contact the resources that you would need. Do you see victims lying in the road? Some victims get ejected from cars and motorcycles, trucks, you name it. You got to be thinking about things. The last thing you want to do is run over an ejected person out of a motor vehicle collision. Is PD on scene or the fire department on scene? Watch for their signals of possible hazards that you're about to drive into. Are there any clues to the forces transmitted to the human body? Upper right, airbag deployed. Looks like the doors caved in somewhat. So if somebody was in that passenger seat, that they were liable to get hit by the door. Lower left, did somebody get a pole dropped on their vehicle? Maybe they ran into a pole that broke and hit the vehicle. Do you see a starred windshield where the patient's head may have hit it? Think about all the different clues that you can find to help you identify what might be going on. We also have an area around the motor vehicle collision known as a danger zone. It's the area around the wreckage of a vehicle or other incident within which special safety precautions should be taken. You need to establish a danger zone. Don't park the ambulance within a danger zone. When there's no apparent hazards, consider a danger zone to extend at least 50 feet in all directions from the wreckage. If fuel's been spilled, consider the danger zone to extend a minimum of 100 feet in all directions from the wreckage. Always think about parking upwind and uphill and upstream from the wreck. If there's a collision and a vehicle's on fire, consider the danger zone to extend a minimum of 100 feet. If it's on fire, you might even want to back that out to a possible 150 feet. Even if the fire appears small or limited to the engine compartment. If there's hazmat involved, hazardous materials involved, check your emergency response guidebook. It's known as the ERG. It's on every piece of emergency equipment. It's about 5 inches by about 3 to 4 inches. And it's a book that if you can identify the number of the hazardous material or the name, it will tell you that you may have to evacuate 2,000 feet in every direction, which moves everybody, including yourself, further away from the wreckage. Think about when explosives are involved. You want to get way away from those. Think about crime scenes, acts of violence. Sometimes they're not always obvious. Some other clues: fighting, loud voices. Look and listen for clues. Fighting, loud voices, barking dogs. Barking dogs inside of a house, you might want to get the dog put outside, even though the owners say, oh, you know, Fluffy over there, he's a nice dog. He's just saying hi. Well, he doesn't know who you are. So he may greet you a little bit differently with a bark and a bite. Don't get in that situation. Small dogs, yappy dogs, they bite too. Don't always think it's just the big dog. Are there obvious signs of alcohol use or other drugs? Be cautious because of unpredictability behavior of users at the scene. Is it unusually silent? If it's too quiet, is there a reason? Be extra cautious. Have you been to this location before and know that it could be a hostile situation or that there's been violence there? Consider what's been experienced in the past. Something to take into consideration. If you suddenly find yourself in a hostile situation, retreat to a position of safety and call for the police department. Your job is not to get your ass kicked on the scene. If you feel threatened, you have every right, and you're not going to get in trouble, to retreat to safety. Because the number one priority on the scene is your safety, then your partner's safety, then the patient's safety. It's kind of nice to be number one in the pecking order. And then you can return to the scene, to the call. As soon as PD gets there and makes it safe, they'll allow you to come back. Now we're going to talk about scene size up. We need to determine the nature of illness in the medical patient, the NOI. So in order to determine the nature of illness, we're going to focus on dispatch information. Dispatch says you have a difficulty breathing patient. We're also going to use what the patient tells us. What is their chief complaint? We're going to use our dispatch information to get initial guide. Their initial response is going to guide our initial response. What they tell you is going to guide it. Difficulty breathing. Okay, we're going to get our mind together for a patient that's having problems breathing. And then we got to think of all the possibilities, what could cause somebody to have difficulty breathing. But the thing we don't want to do is we don't want to get locked into a preconceived idea of the patient's condition, because they very well may present 150% different. And I can give you a call that I was on. It came in as a mother had cut off the baby's fingers. Is that possible? Yes. At the time, there had been a very gruesome call a few weeks earlier in the city of Plano where a mother cut off her child's arms. They were dispatched to an injured child. So there's a big difference between an injured child and a mother cutting off the child's arms. I'm not making this up. It's true. Right at the shoulders. And then she threw him in the bathtub. So this was in about a 2-week period. I get dispatched on a child with a finger cut off. Well, naturally, my mind thought about what the guys were thinking when they were dispatched to an injured child in Plano. We get to the house, we get up to the front door, we knock on the door, the mother greets us at the front door, and the baby is in her arms, quiet, not crying or anything. Think about this. You've been dispatched on a child whose mother has cut off her finger or cut off a finger. You would expect a child to be crying, but the child's quiet. So your mind starts playing games. Ma'am, we have a report that your child's finger's been cut off. And she had a big towel around her. It was like a 6-month-old, 7-month-old baby. It was very, very young, around the arm and hand, but there didn't appear to be any blood. So I'm going, I said, can I look at the injury? She took the towel off. There was no blood on the towel. And she pointed down to her finger, and I can't make this up, but she was clipping, and those of y'all that have newborns, 6-7-month-old kids, even older kids, but she was clipping the baby's fingernail and clipped off a little piece of skin. To her, she told the dispatch she had cut off her baby's finger. It wasn't bleeding, it was just a small piece of skin. I was very relieved, and we offered to take the child and the mother to the hospital, knowing they didn't need to go. And she kind of goes, well, does she really need to go? And I said, no, I don't think she truly needs to go. But what I can do for you and for your child is to put at this time, Barney, the dinosaur, that purple-ass dinosaur, was big. And we carried kiddo Band-Aids. So I put a little purple Barney dinosaur Band-Aid on the kid's finger. Mom was happy. The baby was happy. I was relieved. I did my job. I had her sign the no transport part of the run sheet, went back to the station. So I know that's a long way to getting around to say, don't get any of these preconceived ideas about the patient's condition, because dispatch is going to give you information, but that information may be totally different than what's going on. We need to get an accurate medical history. So the patient, we're going to ask the patient, what's going on today? And when they tell you what is going on, this is known out of their words. It's in their words. And I'm going to use what's on the slide. It came in as difficulty breathing. The patient may tell you, it's hard to breathe right now. Yes, that's a form of difficulty breathing, but the chief complaint is what the patient tells you. Word for word, put in quotation marks on your patient run report. Chief complaint is in the patient's own words. And then we need to find out if they have any associated symptoms. So when we're getting this medical history, we'll find out about some associated symptoms, and we'll be going over this in depth a little later on. But associated symptoms would be something that you would expect to be going along with their chief complaint. The person says it hurts to breathe right now. Difficulty breathing, it hurts to breathe. An associated symptom, you could ask, well, are you having any chest pain when you breathe? That would be an associated symptom. And then on the other side, we have pertinent negatives. A pertinent negative is something that you would expect to be going on with the patient based on their chief complaint, but it's not. Very simply put, patient calls in with a chest complaint. Their heart is beating too fast. They can feel it beating and they think it's coming out of their chest. A pertinent negative would be, you ask them, are you having any shortness or difficulty breathing? Because that's usually associated with chest pain. And we'll talk more about it, but just to give you an idea, pertinent negatives, something that you would expect to be going on with their chief complaint. And another thing, don't let injuries distract you from the underlying problem. You're going to see some grossness out there in the field, my friends, but you can't let that judge how you're going to treat the patient. So our nature of illness on our medical patient, We're going to identify the nature of illness for a medical patient. By identifying it is to determine what is medically wrong with them. We're going to get our source of information from the patient. The patient is the primary source of this information. In other words, you're going to get 80% of your information by what the patient tells you is going on. Medical patient that is alert and conscious and talking to you. You're going to get 80% of what's going on from that patient. Frequently, the patient cannot specifically state what is wrong. Then the family or bystanders can be extremely helpful in providing information. But don't start with family and bystanders. If the patient's awake, alert, and conscious enough to talk to you, that's where we start. Family and bystanders, where the bystanders come into play would be if maybe they were at the grocery store and somebody took ill, they might have seen what happened. But sometimes if you have a bystander, you need to know how close they were to the situation. We're going to look at the scene. What medications do you see that the patient might be taking? Do you note full cigarette ashtrays or the presence of oxygen tubing? Smoking, oxygen tubing, maybe they're a COPD patient, chronic obstructed pulmonary disease patient. Do you note sanitary conditions? So you're going to look around. 80% of the information we get from the patient. We get the other 20% from family, from bystanders, from the scene itself. So this is what you see in here is the other 20%. We're going to gather information, including the signs and symptoms, to reveal the patient's status. Symptoms are an indication of the patient's condition that is subjective. It cannot be observed by you. It is what the patient tells you how they are feeling, or what the patient tells you. A sign is an indication of the patient's condition that is objective, meaning it's observed by you. It can be seen, heard, felt, and smelled. Well, you can see what the patient looks like. So there's a sign. Do they have a smile on their face, or do they have that look of like they just don't feel good? You can look at the color of their skin. You look at the patient. Do they look kept up, or do they look in poor sanitary conditions? So something that we can see is a sign. Here, well, we take blood pressures and we auscultate them by listening through a stethoscope. We take breath sounds by listening through a stethoscope. So a sign would be taking vital signs, listening to breath sounds. Sorry about that. Got ahead of ourselves. So it can be seen, it can be heard, it can be felt. When we take a pulse, we can feel the pulse. That's a sign. We can feel the chest rise and fall. We can also see the chest rise and fall, so that makes it a sound. and smelled. You wouldn't think, but can you smell if somebody's urinated on themselves, pooped on themselves, puked on themselves? Think of the different smells that could be associated with medical type calls. Lower GI bleed. Talk about stink. If you can smell it from the street, that's a lower GI bleed. So signs and symptoms are gathered to help you determine what is wrong with the patient, because you got to be able to fill in the other stuff. The key term here, index of suspicion. We're like hunters and gatherers. We're trying to find out what's going on with the patient. So we should keep a keen awareness that there may be more injuries than can be seen based on the patient's mechanism of injury. So always maintain a high index of suspicion. You see what's going on. High index of suspicion, MOI, mechanism of injury, meaning a trauma type situation. The NOI, nature of illness, we do have a small index of suspicion that something could be going on, but a lot of times our keen awareness is when we're dealing with trauma patients. So now we're getting to with our scene size up, we're going to talk about the mechanism of injury in the trauma patient. Our mechanism of injury, the physical force that caused an injury, such as a fall, a motor vehicle accident, a slip and fall. The mechanism of injury is the force or forces that have been applied to the patient and caused the injury. Mechanism of injury is determined by observation of the scene, what you see of the scene. We get 80% of our information just by looking at the scene. Is it a car crash? Is there more than one car? Are there people that have been ejected from the vehicle, or are there people out walking around? So you get 80% of your information by what you see at the scene of a trauma. The patient, provided that they can talk to you and communicate, you're going to get 20% of your information from what the patient tells you and family and bystanders. Once again, that bystander on the scene of a traumatic situation, whether it's a motor vehicle collision, motorcycle, auto versus ped, auto versus motorcycle, donor cycle, you might not get good information from bystanders. Talk a little bit about the law of inertia. It's a physics law that states that a body in motion remains in motion unless acted on by an outside force. This explains why there are actually 3 collisions involved with each MVC, motor vehicle collision. Most of the time, you're going to hear me say MVC versus motor vehicle crash or motor vehicle collision. So there's actually 3 collisions involved with each MVC. If we can identify the type of MVC, it'll provide important information about the potential injury patterns. The 3 collisions of an MVC: number 1, the vehicle strikes an object. The body of the patient strikes the interior of the vehicle. In turn, the organs of the patient strike the inner surfaces within the body. So if somebody's doing 80 miles an hour down the freeway, or 100 like they like to do, and they hit a bridge abutment, the car's going 100, they hit the bridge abutment. Now the patient, they're still going 100 miles an hour. They hit the interior of the vehicle. All their internal organs are going 100 miles an hour, which hit the inside of the body to create massive injuries. Hence that high index of suspicion. And trust me, you look at that law of inertia, and when you're out in the field, you're going to see stuff on the highways that you go, how in the world number 1, how in the world did they get in this situation? Number 2, you would think that they would be dead, and they're up walking around. Then there's going to be that time that you just see the minimal damage on a vehicle, and the patient's dead. So it's keep that high index of suspicion always when you're looking at traumatic injuries. We'll talk a little bit about head-on collisions for mechanism of injuries. Head-on collisions can affect all parts of the body. And there's 2 particular injury patterns with head-on collisions. There's the up and over the steering wheel, striking their head on the windshield and adding a big star to it. Now, with the windshield, if you see the windshield stuck out a little bit at the driver's side or passenger side, you better think that they got up into that windshield. Look to see if there's any hair embedded into the glass shards on the windshield. If the patient's bleeding from the head, that's a pretty good indication, especially the forehead, upper forehead area into the hairline. That's a pretty good indication they've gotten into the windshield, because you'll see a starring pattern on the windshield. Think about neck compression with the up and overs. How about chest and abdominal injuries from the driver striking the steering wheel? How about rear impact collisions? Rear end collisions cause neck and head injuries. The head jerks backward and the body's pushed forward. Then the head is jerked forward again, causing neck injury and possibly fracturing the cervical spine. And remember, high up on that cervical spine is what controls our breathing and heart rate. And that particular part of the brain, if we remember, is called you're right, the medulla oblongata. It controls our heart rate and our breathing. We damage that, patient pretty much doesn't stand a good chance. How about lateral impact collisions, also called T-bones or broadsided? With this, the head of the patient tends to remain still and the body is pushed out from underneath the neck and the head laterally. Lateral impact. Rollovers. Rollovers have the most potential, has the most potential from the most amount of impacts to the occupant. These rollover type of injury patterns. The rotational impact, also known as the pit maneuver. This is where the vehicle struck, vehicle spins, vehicle impacts other objects. A lot of times the occupants of the vehicle are not sitting where they were when all this pit maneuver started happening. Ask if the patient was restrained or wearing a seatbelt. Because if they were, chances are they're in the same position, but they very well, depending on how fast the rotational's going, could be thrown out. Maybe the seat belt broke, maybe the seat back broke. And that rotational can be around upright on all four tires. It can be end over end over end over end, or it could be side rotational. So something we need to figure out, was the patient ejected from the vehicle? Is there deformity to the windshield? Is the steering wheel bent or broken? Are the seat backs still intact? Are they broken? Or did the seat pull out of the floorboard of the vehicle? Something to take into effect. Was there a greater than 12-inch intrusion into the vehicle? You need to tell the trauma surgeons if there was. Think about your own vehicle. If you're sitting, driving your own vehicle and you were to get hit broadside, if your door was to get pushed in 12 inches, think about the damage that could be done to you on your left side. What if you're a passenger in your buddy's car and get hit on the right side? That car coming in 12, 14, 16 inches can do a lot of damage to the human body. So you need to think and tell the trauma surgeons how far the intrusion was. We're not saying get out a tape measure, just take a wild guess. And that's where your index of suspicion comes in for other possible injuries to the body. Were they wearing their seatbelt? Did the airbag deploy? Airbags that deploy, especially like the steering wheel, what we need you to do is, if the airbag is deployed, pick up the airbag and look at the steering wheel to see if it's still symmetrically round, or is it bent over and almost look like a taco, bent down on both sides. And it's known as tacoing a steering wheel, where it's just bent all the way over. And also with airbag deployments, the airbag that's on the passenger side that comes out just above the glove compartment area, if it's deployed, a lot of times it'll push the bottom part of the windshield out. That's not the same as the starring of a windshield from somebody's head. Down and under injury patterns. Patient's body travels under the steering wheel. The knees strike the dashboard. They could have possible femur fractures, hip dislocations, or like this person, the abdomen strikes the steering wheel and causes a smiley face imprint on the abdomen. Think about how hard they hit the steering wheel, or could be uh, the dashboard, to create that deep, dark bruise. Think about what abdominal organs are in that area, in the lower right quadrant and the lower left quadrant. Because remember, our umbilicus is our bullseye point to mark top and bottom, left to right. Think about the organs that are in those locations. Look inside the vehicle. Is there hair and scalp embedded in the broken windshield? If you look at the windshield up towards the left side where it's starred, that's the location of the starring of the windshield. Sometimes if drivers get up into the windshield, they can hit that rear view mirror in the middle and actually shear it off and catch the holding place that holds the mirror on there, and get a pretty big laceration down across their face. Think about mechanism of injuries from other motorized vehicles, motorcycles, other motorized vehicles other than cars. Were they wearing a helmet? All-terrain vehicles. Was the patient thrown over the handlebars? Snowmobiles, like we have a lot of snowmobiles here in the North Texas area. Or were they wearing any other protective equipment being worn? Think about the boaters and the jet skis and the jet skis. I forget what they're called, but the injury patterns for these people that hit the water. You're doing 40, 50 miles an hour on the water, and you hit the water, it's like hitting concrete. Think about the injury patterns that could be associated with that. How about the mechanism of injuries from falls? How far did the victim fall? What is the surface made of that the patient fell onto? Was it soft grass? Was it mud? Was it concrete? What part of the patient impacted the ground first? Did anything interrupt the fall? Or was it a tree trimmer that fell out of the tree while he was trimming a tree and he hit every tree limb on the way down? The thing to take into account is the height of the fall greater than 15 feet or 3 times the patient's height? These distances are frequently severe, and most likely will have you'll have a statement in your protocol to transport them to a trauma center. Just by looking at this picture, each of these rungs is about, well, if even we use a foot, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 to 10 feet. And if he's 6 foot, there's 16 foot. Yeah, that's, chances are there's a big chance of having significant injuries. Did he hit any of these cross members on the way down? That could create problems. Some other blunt and penetrating trauma. Either type, whether it's blunt or penetrating, may occur from a variety of mechanisms of injuries. Blunt trauma, this is a fill in the blank here. Blunt trauma is the result of force to the body that causes injury without penetrating the soft tissue. Blunt trauma. This would be a picture of blunt trauma. Penetrating trauma is the result of forces that cause injury from objects that primarily pierce and penetrate the surface of the body. Blunt force trauma, injuries caused by a blow that strikes the body but does not penetrate the skin or the body tissue. Usually the patients are going to experience some form of internal hemorrhage or spillage of abdominal contents into the body cavities. Look for reddening of the skin at the site of impact, followed by bluish discoloration. Penetrating trauma is an injury that's caused by an object that passes through the skin, such as bullets, knives, ice picks, nails. We're going to classify the wound based on the velocity or speed of the object that caused the injury. Low velocity weapons are typically propelled by the hand, such as a knife, and is usually limited to the area of penetration. We also have medium velocity weapons, such as handguns, shotguns, even arrows from compound bows are considered medium velocity. And then we have high velocity weapons, such as hunting rifles and assault rifles. What we need to think about is the body region that has been penetrated and exit wounds. Is there an exit wound? We've got penetration. Is there exit wound? And is it a straight entrance to the exit, or did it hit other body parts and move the trajectory of the bullet? So with penetrating trauma, bullets cause damage in two ways. It could be damage from the projectile. The bullet itself damages the structures. And this all depends on the caliber of the bullet, its path traveled, and whether or not it fragmented. If the bullet fragmented, then it's going to take different paths. You're going to have numerous paths of injury inside the body, but not all of the fragments will exit the body. And two, pressure-related damage or cavitation. As the bullet passes through the body, it produces a cavitational wave that's temporary, but greater than the actual bullet size. It goes in small and comes out larger. It's a pressure wave that also draws air and contaminants in behind it. So this is the end of part 1 of 5 parts of patient assessment over chapters 11, 12, and 13.